Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast with Social Rights Ireland and the Peter O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. I am Patricia Campbell and I'm filling in for Roisin McAleer this week. Formidable boots to fill in for, might I add. And this week we're going to look at the dynamics, the strained dynamics in the Stormont executive. And we will refer to an article in the Irish News that appeared on Saturday. And it is, I'll just read some of it. It is an article by Rebecca Black and Claudia Savage, Press Association, July the 31st, 2026. Sinn Féin has sounded a warning on the future of power sharing in Northern Ireland, claiming the behaviour of the DUP is frustrating delivery. Senator Conor Murphy claimed power sharing is a precarious place and that the DUP don't have the political will to make it work. He insisted his party is wedded to power sharing and that the DUP is there because they have to be there. The DUP have demonstrated that they don't have the political will to make the assembly work. And that poses bigger questions for power sharing. The institutions are in a precarious place, he said. And then DUP Gavin Robinson, he said, not only that they are committed to the institutions and not only the institutions, but delivering for the people we are proud to represent. The statement came as parties visited Hillsborough Castle for meetings with the new Secretary of State, Chris Bryant. Sir Chris arrived in the region for his first official visit in post on Friday and visited defence system plants Thales in East Belfast ahead of meeting the Stormont parties. Now, certainly it looks like the institutions are in trouble, and I think it's very interesting that the first port of call for the new Secretary of State was to visit the Thales in East Belfast. I would like to come to you, Tommy, first and ask you, you have consistently said that the North was a failed entity. So I would like to ask you, what's your opinion on this latest so-called crisis in Stormont?
Thanks, Patricia. I think it's nothing new, what's happening in Stormont at the moment. As we've said before, the Six Counties is a failed political entity. It has been from the very inception 100 years ago. And it was mismanaged by unionism for the first 50 years of its existence through repressive legislation and systemic discrimination. As it becomes challenged, what we're finding happening is that unionism finds it impossible to make any compromise whatsoever, because unionism has consistently found itself in a position where it's consistently outmaneuvered to the right. From way back in the middle 60s, Captain Terence O'Neill attempted to make some sort of a minor few concessions to non-unionist population. He was outmaneuvered. Brian Faulkner, who had taken part in outmaneuvering O'Neill, was in turn outmaneuvered by Craig, and who was joined actually by Trimble. And at the time, then when Trimble tried to make concessions, he was outmaneuvered by the Paisleyite camp. And now we're looking at the DUP being outmaneuvered by the TUV. Consistently, you see each party finds itself having to play out to respond to the far right of unionism, which means that there's no agreement whatsoever on how the place can be run except through out-and-out discriminatory practices of the old-fashioned days, which are not likely to return. So therefore you're finding that the administration up in Stormont cannot function because there can be no agreement, because if the leading unionist party happened to agree with Sinn Féin or whoever happened to be representing the non-unionist population, that would be outmanoeuvred. And that's what's happening at the moment. The DUP finds itself being outmanoeuvred by the TUP. Latest opinion polls actually found that the Ulster Unionist Party, which I thought was for years in terminal decline, has, the latest opinion poll, slightly come in front of the DUP. Now that's possibly because of the response to the Jeffrey Donaldson scandal. The DUP might regain some small momentum, but remember, they're all looking at the next set of elections in May of next year. The situation just can't be resolved because unionism will not agree to work at all with anybody else. So we're finding that the major projects in the 6 counties for AF5, Loughney, housing, education, health service are all in serious trouble. No attempts been made to address them. Can't, because they can't even agree on a budget for the year. And all they can do is keep saying that they need more money from England. Now, at some stage, England will possibly say, no, there's nothing more coming. I think it's very insightful that whenever Chris Bryant, the new Secretary of State, or Pro-Consul, as Brian Feeney tends to call them lately, new Pro-Consul, first visit was to Thales, an arms manufacturer in East Belfast. It's very apparent that the British government is not interested really in what's happening here, apart from keeping an eye on the military aspects of it. So I think we're looking here at a long-term failure of the situation. Whether the institutions collapse or not, I think it's to an extent irrelevant, because they can't function and never will function. The only solution will be to abolish the state, remove partition. But of course it can't be removed and just simply formed what I would call a 32-county free state, which will now solve nothing, but it has to be a socialist republic if we're to have any sense of progress at all to overcome sectarianism in the north. Because as long as partition remains, it'll always be possible to have some malefactor, malevolent player raise the constitutional issue to keep the sectarian card on the table. But yes, I don't think there's anything surprising about what's happening. Unionism is incapable of changing, and the opposition at the moment is not really. I suppose they're talking about United Ireland instead of qualitatively different, something different. In short terms, the 6-county state is a failed political entity and cannot be improved upon.
Absolutely. And certainly the last 20, 25 years have proven that. Barry, I will move to you and just ask you, why are Sinn Féin sounding a warning now and blaming the DUP?
It's not the first time flagged or send warnings in relation to Stormont collapsing. And I mean, it's a bit rich of them talking about Stormont collapsing when they already know from the Good Friday Agreement, the St Andrews Agreement, and the New Decade's New Approach that Stormont was set up as part of the sectarian pacification process, and it was bound to fail. Plus the fact that what we're talking about here is a satellite state of the British imperialist setup, and that's all they're concerned about. They control the purse strings, so they can play politics simply by using the purse strings. Sinn Féin are, in my opinion, trying to save face here. They realise that the Stormont project has run into a brick wall. It's going nowhere. And surely they realise that after 30 years now, 30 years, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed at all in relation to the material interest of the people on the ground. As Tommy's just after pointing out there, health, housing, education, infrastructure, all these things are just hanging by a thread. Some of them are not functioning properly at all. Certainly the health service is not. There's a housing crisis in the north. There's no way that the Stormont project was ever designed to ensure that the north would become a decent place to live in, and that the working class in particular would have any benefits out of it. I mean, the only people getting benefits out of this is the politicians themselves, with extremely high salaries, unbelievable expense accounts, even down to not paying for their water. They even put water down now as an expense. They were travelling in electric cars and claiming for mileage some time back there. There's been numerous scandals, not to mention the Ash for Cash scandal some years ago. I mean, it's endless. So it's no different to any other bourgeois parliament, other than this is a colonial parliament and it's part of holding the administration intact in the 6 counties. And until, as Tommy points out, that changes, we're going to be continually in the same place. The other thing I might point out is that we have council elections here in May next year. I wonder, is there any possibility that there's couture politics going on here? That Sinn Féin is flagging the sectarianism of the Stormont regime, which they know all about and which they knew before they ever went into it. I wonder if they're just attempting to use that now as a sort of a wind-up to get the voters wound up so that they'll vote the way they should vote as they see it in the next year. Corey Margaret?
Well, that's very interesting, Barry, that you say that. And just, I would like to move to Matt, but before that, I would just like to ask you, is the new Secretary of State a fair and honest broker, as he said?
Of course he's not. He can't be. I mean, that's a nonsense, because he's the Secretary of State of the British imperialist Parliament, you know, who are holding the 6 counties in subjection. How can he be fair and partial? He can't be. The interests of the British state come first. He wouldn't even discuss the Stormont budget. It wasn't even on the list. But yet he could go to the Thales military manufacturers of death in East Belfast. The very first mission he did before he even met politicians, which shows that the interests of the capitalism and the interest of the military industrial complex are far more important than housing or health or any of those things that the budget might be stretched to. I mean, no Secretary of State, no British minister can be impartial or fair in the 6 counties. It's not possible.
Absolutely, Barry. Well, I will bring Matt Siegfried in here, a very welcome guest to our programme. He is a historian and writer based in Ypsilanti in the US. And Matt, you have been a long-term observer of the situation in Ireland, the Stormont executive, etc. And I'm wondering, I would like to hear your take on this.
Well, I would have a couple of questions to begin with. And the first question I would have is, both Barry and Tommy were talking about the limited options that unionism faces going forward. And in the and to draw a parallel to the United States, one could say that in the context of the changing demographics, et cetera, that the old line white supremacist Jim Crow world had very limited options. And yet somehow it's found a way to survive, not just survive, but get itself reborn. And I'm wondering if that TUV option relies, though, because of the empire, relies on the reform option in Britain. And do you understand what I'm saying? That perhaps the option is an anti-democratic option, but it can't be done simply on the basis of the 6 counties. It would have to be an anti-democratic option led from the imperialist core, the Farage, and even to his right. And I think some years ago that would have just seemed not an option, but of course these days it is an option. And because it seems to me that Sinn Féin also is in a real bind. They've come also to the end of this. I mean, we keep hearing. I just saw an interview with Adams. They're promoting the new documentary on Irish unity, and every 6 months we're going to have a referendum next year, and all of that kind of. that's not going to happen. And even if it were going to happen, there's no way it would be binding in a way that would guarantee all of that. And so Sinn Féin is also in a bind. And in their own way, like our Democratic Party here, they rely on the crisis of unionism as something to run against, right? And they don't want to resolve that crisis because they have nothing to run against if they don't if they resolve that crisis. And it seems to me that it's a very different atmosphere because of its colonial and imperial context. But it seems that the left is not strong enough yet to offer an alternative. Democracy has no future in a world where Elon Musk rules. And so the right, that then becomes the option to get out of the crisis because the normal politics aren't working. Now, maybe Burnham can reimagine the whole thing and it'll start, working as normal again. To me, it's what's happening in the Stormont is indicative of they're out of options everywhere, and we're not strong enough to enforce our own options. And what did Gramsci says, that's the time of monsters. And for the unionists, just like our white supremacists, they welcome the monsters. That is their way out. That's they don't have a democratic way out, but the non-democratic way out is a possibility. But again, they can't just do that there. It requires that within the British context. So that would be my thoughts and questions.
Right, okay. And so in short, Matt, because I'd like to bring Tommy in to respond to that. So in short, what is your simple question to Tommy?
How much of the crisis in Stormont is part of the larger crisis in the politics of not just even Britain, but the European Union? What's next after Stormont? Stormont was meant to create a situation that normal things could then happen. Well, what's normal now?
Very interesting, Matt. Obviously, Stormont is part of a wider situation. We're seeing an ending or a change in the economy. The last 40 to 50 years of neoliberalism has left us in a situation where economy in not only the 6 counties of the north of Ireland, but across Europe and the United States for that matter too, there's little funding left now to care for the essentials. So therefore there's such things as we refer to the infrastructure, education, health, housing, all of which at least could have ameliorated the situation to some extent. Now that's not there to be used. Burnham might promise much. I doubt very much if he can deliver because he's really part of the system. He's already committed himself to a hardline foreign policy, supporting NATO, rearming, expanding the arms industry in Britain. And he's talking about making some concessions, which is going to prove very difficult for him to do. And if he fails, well, that means that we're looking really at a very dangerous situation where even the right wing of social democracy have collapsed. The only answer now is the only option many people see would be Farage, the reform movement, far right, coming to power. There is something happening in not only in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, but across the island, and that's a rise of racism, which my fear is that racism can displace what used to be religious sectarianism, and that will facilitate the rightward thrust of the situation. Sinn Féin, on the other hand, has not adopted a sufficiently clear, unambiguous left-wing position. Sinn Féin talks about United Ireland as if removing partition was the answer to the problem instead of setting up a different economic system based on socialism, a workers' republic. Connolly identified the need for a workers' republic well over a century ago before his death. That's where we should be going, not looking about United Ireland per se, which is simply just a 32-county free state. We are definitely coming to a difficult period, potentially dangerous period. In 6 counties, although it has its own outlook, can't ignore the greater picture and will be caught up in the greater picture. Yeah, I think you're right, Matt, and it's a worrying time. But I suppose we always have to keep in mind that we can't surrender to despair. We must always remain optimistic that things can always be better. And in the long run, we'll see the triumph of civilization and the working class triumph.
Yeah, we certainly have our work cut out for us. There's no doubt about that. Thank you for that, Tommy. I see Alan has his hand up. Alan, would you like to come in on that?
Tommy referenced, and they spoke initially, the first 50 years of Northern Ireland, when the Loyalism, unionism dominated the society and abused their power and causing a degree of instability, which eventually and inevitably led to the resistance to that increasing to the chaotic state of the so-called Troubles, late 60s, 70s, 80s. I mean, that had to come to an end because it couldn't win. It highlighted the grossly divisive and repressive nature of unionism, and the whole world focused on it and began to get interested in what the hell was the British government, what was the Northern Ireland, what the unionists doing, and they had to find a solution. The solution was Stormont. Now, Stormont, by its nature, cannot solve anything. I mean, it was, to me, it was part of creating a degree of stability, that the violence, the armed struggle came to an end. But it was a stagnation that led to this crazy situation where practical decisions on health, on social services, on education couldn't be made. Everything was turned into is it more pro-Catholic or pro-Protestant, and they deliberately find ways of arguing. Now, my understanding of what's happened is, in a way, that the society's pivoted. Not only did the Civil War bring about Stormont, but almost at the same time, the strength of the Republican or Catholic side of the society increased to this extent that the Republican parties are dominant and have the leading role. So it's created a very difficult problem for unionism. I don't think either unionism or the Republican side of things want Stormont to collapse. That they don't want direct rule. Although, interestingly, when there is direct rule, it is quite that actually doesn't just bring out a nationalist to say the future should be a united Ireland. Protestant sections of the Protestant population don't like direct rule. They don't like being told what to do by Britain. There's a twisted way in which that can be used for the Republican argument, United Ireland. One thing is that when Sinn Féin had this, they've also given interviews for this article. Everything they do is planned. They're not like other parties. They will be sitting in meeting rooms and deciding everything. Exactly what people are going to say, exactly what the policy is. When you speak, you have to say this, you have to say that, you can't say it, and there's a plan. So everything that we're seeing in that article is schemed and planned and has a purpose, and a thought out purpose. I would have thought a big part is what Barry was saying, this to do with elections, that they have to present themselves as the real Republicans, not like Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, not like the SDLP. We're the ones that are the champions you must trust and follow and vote for. So a big part of what they're saying is probably that. I don't think that they want to dissolve Stormont, although they're saying it's. I sort of think the pivot that's arising now is, should we continue with Stormont or should we move to some sort of united Ireland? Sinn Féin are clever. They can enhance and build that. And the unionists won't like that. But that's another component of it, that they want to use it in any way they can to enhance the argument for why it's useless. Stormont doesn't work. The best option, a terrible option, is direct rule. The only other viable option, bad as it is for some people, is uniting the country in some sort of federation with lots of compromises. And it may be that it can help that way. I would say that Sinn Féin has planned and has this in mind and has theories about how this can work and how it's going to operate.
Thank you, Alan. I see that Barry has put his hand up. He would like to come in. So over to you, Barry.
Sectarianism and racism, as both Tommy and Matt pointed out, I mean, those are the stock and trade of colonialism, and have been for the last 850 years. So it's nothing new. We're aware of all of that. Now, unfortunately, both the nationalist Republican parties and the unionist parties also use sectarianism and increasingly racism as weapons of political point score and encouraging people to vote for them and to vote against the other. So that's a whole other part, and a very central part indeed of the setup within the 6 counties. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether there's a Catholic / nationalist Republican majority within the 6 counties. All that the British are concerned about is the 6 counties and the 26 counties going to remain part of the capitalist NATO European system. That's the key bit. The unionists would be thrown under the bus in the morning and will be thrown under the bus if need be. If that type of situation was threatened, if Britain felt for any reason the capitalist, imperialist, NATO project, Commonwealth project, call it whatever you will, was in any way threatened. So, I mean, we can't lose sight of these things. You see these little petty squabbles, shall we say, between, unionists and Republicans within the Stormont context. But I mean, that really, really, at the end of the day, that's only Mickey Mouse stuff compared to what the real controllers of the purse strings and the real controllers, therefore, of power, and that is the British, are thinking about. And they think long term, and they think 100 years ahead, not necessarily 5 years ahead of the next election.
Barry, certainly global politics has shone a whole new light on everything, really. And I think at the end of the day, we are in a terrible situation regarding housing, health. During the war, during the conflict, whatever you want to call it, at least we had a health service. We had a local hospital. We could get GP appointments. We had housing. People could put their names down for public housing. Nobody was homeless for too long. There was a safety net. And certainly the last 25 years of Stormont has eroded all of that. And I'm just wondering if there's anyone else here. I see Patrice and Mihal and a few other people here. And I'm just wondering, would anybody like to come in and contribute to this before we finish the recording? Oh, Mihal, good, yeah.
But look, there's a couple of things there. Look, and I've listened to Patricia there on about the safety nets that we did have around health and housing and that, and how that's become eroded. We need to be very realistic about this here, is in terms of the Sinn Féin project, who participated and do participate in this. I'm acknowledging that, but I think the big thing here is, without being dismissive of anybody on a trolley bed or on a waiting list, need that be for operations or healthcare or housing? Most definitely not. The majority of my work would be that, like most of the comrades here, around social work that we do. The big concern for me here is the rise of fascism, the rise of racism. And my massive concern within the Free State around the fact that we're not that organised around NATO. We're not that organised around neutrality. And I look, I'm not being dismissive of anyone. I include myself in this. And these things are hugely important. And the rise of fascism and the pending wars that are in front of us in the interest of the capitalist West is very, very concerning. And when we talk about Stormont, neither Sinn Féin or the SDLP are willing to challenge that. When we talk about the state in the 26 counties, neither Sinn Féin or the Social Democrats are really genuinely willing to challenge that. And we have a real problem. I am extremely concerned of where we are right now. Really, really concerned. So, for example, when I talk within our council chamber around neutrality, there ain't no engagement from any so-called progressive parties, typically Sinn Féin, around neutrality. When we've done a number of when the fascists were marching in Gweedore, fascist/racist, and in Litchcannon, none of the Sinn Féiners turned up. Actually, we had a emergency motion. Sinn Féin supported the emergency motion, but failed to turn up on the day. One hand I can count on them two marches how many Sinn Féin members were there. Gweedore, there was one. Liscannel, there was two, and that was it. So we're facing a situation that we should all be very concerned, that we should all be, and that we are, but we need to do more organising around the rise of fascism, yes, but also the ending of whatever wee little minute bit of neutrality the Free State has. Anyway, that's my contribution.
Well, yeah, thank you, Micheál, and absolutely all these issues are of grave concern. And I would like to say that I do have hope, because the people on the ground are aware. And as for Sinn Féin, the salt of the earth people vote for Sinn Féin. They include friends, neighbours, families, work colleagues, and the people on the ground. I think now we need to hold them to account. And I do believe that there is a will there to fight this dreadful racism and to be on the ground raising issues like housing. And for those who say, but what about us? What about putting us first? What about putting housing for us? Come and join us. Let's demand our rights together, collectively, and stop blaming refugees and stop blaming all these other issues. It's up to us all to collectively organise. Matt, you have your hand up, yes?
I think that's a really good point about the danger that people are making, because I think that just like race here, immigration is not just, something that's bad that we hope that people, it is an anti-immigration is an imperialist ideology. And it's a way for because it's not just Britain who's you're all overlord. You have Fortress Europe, right? And if you can convince Irish not to be part of the British Empire, but to be part of Fortress Europe, then you have convinced Ireland to completely, or Irish people to completely join another empire. So anti-immigration is an imperialist ideology that allows you then to make a whole bunch of political steps you never would make without. Right? The same way racism allows you to put up your hand and say, I like the boss even when he's killing me here. It's not just bad that it implies something much worse politically, and it can lead to, it is a real issue that needs to be fought, not on the basis of moralism or this or that. I'm a historian. The early Communist Party in the United States, they never called it racism. They called it white chauvinism or white supremacy. And they said it's an imperialist ideology, right? And so you could always choose not to have an imperialist ideology and be a supremacist, right? It wasn't just I'm white, they qualified it that way. But I think we need to say that this anti-immigration, whatever you think about the solution to immigration and all that, but that's an imperialist ideology, and it will lead you to the EU. That's one of the reasons we need to fight it.
Yes, absolutely, Matt. I don't think anyone on this programme, I see you're getting lots of claps here for that. I don't think anyone could disagree with that. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending this very interesting discussion this evening. So we will end the recording, and anyone who wants to stay on to further the conversation, please do.
Slán.
Slán.